Hi, I'm Jeanette Sutton,
And I'm Eddie Bertola.
and welcome to another episode of The Alerting Authority. And as always, we encourage you to subscribe, follow, listen, and most importantly, participate in these podcasts. We want your questions, concerns, ideas, problems, pain points, success stories, so we as alerting authorities can better do our jobs and make our communities safer.
And I hope you guys have fun with us. And I want to thank our sponsors that help make this possible. One of those today is HQE Systems. HQE Systems is a disabled, veteran-owned, full-service alert origination software provider. And our hats off, as always, to those who have served and currently serve our country. HQE specializes in cutting-edge life safety and electronic safety solutions. They can help provide solutions to the pain points in your notification process. They have the latest generation of outdoor warning sirens, indoor notifications, electronic mass notifications, and can control it all through one piece of software. So thank you, HQE, for making this possible.
All right, so Eddie, what do you have for us today?
So today, actually, I think we're going to have fun. And once you listen to this a few times, you're going to know that Jeanette and I have some of those little buttons that can just get us fired up fairly quickly. And I think it is my job to hit those buttons sometimes just to see where we're going. And to preface, I think it's important. You'll hear us talk about jargon, and we don't like jargon. Jargon being specific words that a few people understand or a community understands that others may not. And it can cause confusion when we just use jargon. And so to help us, Jeanette, we are going to be touching on over alerting today and maybe, some incomplete messages and those things. So to start us off, do you mind giving a quick brief on over alerting and what we are going to refer to it as?
Yeah. So over alerting is a kind of jargon that is, until recently, not really well measured, is something that people talk about a lot. In fact, you hear it, emergency managers will talk about, oh, that's an example of over alerting, or even the media will talk about over alerting, but it's not very well defined. And so the work that Michelle Wood and I recently did with funding from USGS was to investigate what is the correct definition of over alerting and how do we measure it. Until you have a good definition and good dimensions that are measurable, you can't effectively measure how to prevent over alerting because we don't really know what people mean when they say over alerting. So from our research, we found that there were three different major dimensions. The first one is over alerting is frequency, like people getting too many alerts. The second one is relevancy, which is what I'm going to talk about more today. And then the third one is content. But relevancy has a lot of dimensions. And one of the most important ones is whether or not people feel, so it's the feeling of the alert, they feel like this message applies to them and they can interpret from the contents whether or not they need to take an action. And if they don't need to take an action, there is a question about whether or not that message should be sent.
So it's one of those topics, again, this is a piece. And if you're like, man, now I understand over alerting, you don't. Okay. But where can they go to actually get more of that research? Because it is a research paper you guys have done. There's other parts that you've done. Where can they go for that?
So they can always check out thewarnroom.com, which is where I share and store all of the research papers that I have worked on with my colleagues and collaborators from across the US and internationally. We have a whole library of papers we've written together, and that's where you can find it. So you would go to my resources on the Warren Room and look for the paper on over alerting. And the paper is called Opting Out, and it's by Jeannette Sutton and Michelle Wood.
And for those that are thinking, do I really need to look into that research at all? The answer is yes. Do not be dumb. And I say that from experience is if you don't know, you're just relying on yourself and you're relying on your own experience. And I'm telling you, you don't have to do that anymore. You can actually look and learn from actual research to make yourself better in what you do. And this kind of goes into what I was going to talk to you about today. So, for those that are watching this on video, you're going to see a screen I'm going to put up. We really try to get real alerts. These aren't fake ones that we make to make fun of people or to say, hey, this could happen. This is stuff that has gone out. And so I'm going to share it. I'm going to read it for those that are listening, so you have it. Jeanette's going to see it, and then I want to get some of her, initial reactions to it, and we'll go from there. So you're going to see it, Jeanette, pop up in just a second. And this again is an actual alert that went out. There are two parts to it, but I'm only going to share the first part right now. So as it comes up, I'll read it. It says emergency alert. And then the text below says male, and then it's a W slash, so with firearm in the area, period. Black male, comma, black/gray shirt and blue jeans, period. If seen, call 911. So, and reading it more quickly, male with firearm in the area, black male, black/gray shirt and blue jeans. If seen, call 911. What are your initial thoughts for this?
My initial thought, I I do kind of shake my head because this is a really great representation of a message that's incomplete. It's missing some key pieces of information that would help people to understand, are they safe or not? I mean, it's difficult to tell. So first of all, if we think about the content that should be included in a good message, we know from our research that the message to tell us who this is from, which is not included, the location, in this case, it says in the area.
Doesn't that solve
Um,
everything in the area? Right?
no, so not everyone understands how these alerts are issued. For the person who's sitting at the desk and drawing the polygon and saying, send it here, they know where that message is going to. But for the general message receiver, they're not going to have an understanding at all of who is affected or who's receiving that message. But if in this area, and that could be a block, but it could also be a mile. And so it's very broad and not specific. But then, one of the key things here that I think is really missing is I can't tell if the person is dangerous and if I should be doing something to protect myself, or if the sender is telling me to be just watching for them and give them a call to 911 and say, hey, I saw this person who's wearing a black shirt and blue jeans, which could be describing a lot of people in that area.
Well, exactly, and it's one of those. I don't know if the intent here, and I say this tongue in cheek because, you know, in law enforcement, of course, we don't want people to go out as a vigilante and be like, "Hey, this is essentially a bounty. I need to go out and look for a black male with a black gray shirt and blue jeans that has a firearm that's somewhere in, as you said, quote unquote, the area." That's not the intent. But man, it doesn't read any much clearer than that, because it doesn't give that protective action. Like, what do they want you to do with this? Be scared?
Maybe. Well, they do use caps for the word call, which we know from research again that that's a good practice to identify things that are really important in all caps. But it seems like they are asking for assistance in finding this person because the only actions they're telling people is if seen, call.
And I'm interested. So for those that can comment, I'd love to get your comments on what your initial impressions are for this, and it'd be fun to review those later. And honestly, because I know this was posted, there's a lot of comments that have come from this. Um, but as we talk about over alerting, and we talk about how this could actually, like, because this is an incomplete message, and we know it's an incomplete message. It doesn't have all the components to help us um, take a protective action for ourselves or for someone else. Um, but how can this also play into the topic of over alerting? I know you had the area, but what are your thoughts?
So it's both. It fits into two things. It fits into the question about whether or not this is relevant to people. because of the in the area, people can't necessarily determine whether or not they are in the area with the person who has the firearm. But it also really the lack of content that's necessary for people to know what the danger is to themselves and the action they need to take, that fits into over alerting because of contents. And content is an interesting one to think of for over alerting, but it's the absence of content that makes people feel like they're receiving a message that's more of a notification, which raises a question about whether or not the message should have gone out at all. And if a message is not indicating that the conditions are severe and urgent and require someone to take an action immediately, which is around the issue of over alerting and relevancy, then the content needs to reflect um, those conditions so that people can determine whether or not it's actionable. And in this case, we have both the issues of can't tell if it's relevant, and that's largely due to the content.
Well, and again, we're not here just to poke fun or to say whoever sent this, screwed up. Now, I'll be the first one to say this was not a great message to go out. Okay, and it's one of those agreed. And it's not that a message shouldn't have gone out for this emergency because a message probably needed to go out, but the way it was sent could be better. And so I'm a big proponent on not just kind of pointing at it, but then talking about how could it be better? Like what could make this message go out? And I just want to pick a random place. This message was not sent. Let's say pick Oklahoma, and again was not sent in Oklahoma. If you live around a border of Oklahoma, there's a possibility you may get this because of the way that the wireless emergency alerts are sent, dependent, blah, 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 depending on cell towers, depending on your specific settings. And so if you don't live in that specific area, you may still get this. And think of the confusion that exists, right? You're getting something that you don't know if it applies. But Jeanette, what are a couple things, and then I'll fill in anything that I think that could happen too, that you would do to this message to make it um, just a better, more effective message?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would do is I would say, who is this message from? And I generally talk about contents in the order that the contents should be structured in a message. And so the first thing that I see that's missing is the source of the message. I don't know who sent it. I don't know if it was emergency management, a sheriff's office, police department, someone else who had access to WIA.
I'm
So
just
I'd
going to
want to know
guess
who
it
the sender.
wasn't the male with the firearm, but it could have been anybody else.
It could have, yeah, correct. I
You
agree.
know,
Yeah.
who knows?
um, the hazard is listed, but I don't understand what the hazard is to me. Am I in danger? And so I'd want to include that information. This is a person with a firearm who's perceived to be dangerous. Just adding some indication of that having the firearm with them indicates that other people need to take a protective action, which leads to the one of the key things that I think is missing here is, do you want people to do something other than call 911? Because that when you give that instruction for people to take an action, it first of all, it tells them what they need to do, but second, it helps them to understand how serious this particular condition is. So if you're sending this message, they should be doing something to protect themselves. What
And
do you
it's,
think?
oh, I 100% agree. And it's one of those, if this is sent out, now I'm going to throw out Texas, Arkansas, and some of the others, a male with a firearm in the area. Well, a lot of people carry guns in the area. Again, what is this element of danger? And then one thing from, again, a lot of experience and not all successes, right? Things that I've learned when you're not specific about the area that you're targeting and you're not listing it in the alert, there's a lot of confusion that can happen. Think if you live in quote unquote that area, the area, and there are schools around there. So are schools impacted? Do schools need to go on a lockdown? If you get this and you're a principal, if you're an administrator and you're like, wow, we just got a notification that there's a male with a firearm in the area, I imagine you would take a protective action to secure the safety of your students. The same as business owners or anything else. By not putting actual information in there to help somebody make a decision that's the right decision, you are causing a lot of extra potential hurt and trauma or worry when it may not be needed because they may get this message and be 40 miles away from where this person may be. And if you look at a radius of an alert polygon or an area, whatever it is that the person that decided to send it, there's a lot of people that could be impacted, and without all the information, they are going to be forced to try to make some decision. And again, think of all the schools that could go on lockdown in this large area for something that may not be needed. So I'm a big proponent. List the area, and then, as Jeanette said too, what makes this dangerous? Are they on foot? Are they walking? Were they driving around? Are police engaged with them currently at a residence? All important things. And one thing with law enforcement, and again, I can say this right, as one, we have trouble providing information to the public. We use words like, "Well, it's important to the investigation. We just don't want to share yet." And there are times when that may be a plausible response, but often it's just because we're not good at sharing information. There is nothing wrong if you feel that there is enough urgency to put out a message like this. Give some additional information to let our communities know what they can do to be safe and if they're even impacted. So yeah, Jeanette, I guess I had a couple things to say.
You did. And there's one thing that neither of us had talked about yet, which was that this message doesn't tell us the time. It doesn't say anything about when this person was last seen in the area. So it could have been 20 minutes ago, it could have been 5 minutes ago. If they're on foot, they may have been moving out of the area. If they're in a vehicle, they could have moved on. But giving some indication of when the message was issued or when they were last seen, that would be a real important piece of information also for people who who need to understand when they need to take action and when the message was being issued.
And where can they go for more information, right? I tell you,
Right.
you look at here and you'll hear it on this podcast over and over. I say sometimes we do just enough to get people scared and confused. And this is one of those occasions. Because if you have somebody who wants to get more information, right? And they're looking what other information is there to know if I'm impacted. There's no source, there's no link to a potential website or any place or reference that says, we're going to give you more information soon, or here's a place to go. Why is that important, Jeanette?
Well, it's if people are looking for information, well, people will look for information. If it is perceived to be meaningful and perceived to be urgent and it blows up your phone because we are very loud and disruptive. And the information is not provided by the person who's issuing the message. Will find that information somewhere else, and it may not be the information you want them to be relying on. And so providing a link to information that is authoritative, credible, provides those ongoing updates, it will help people to get accurate information. It could also reduce the number of calls that you're getting as people are trying to figure out what is going on and why did this message come to me. So, the resource drain when you issue a message that is incomplete like this, I could just imagine people calling 911 and just blowing up the call center because they're trying to understand what's going on.
Did somebody put you up to saying just that last little line? Because I swear, I may have told you that story before. Again, I have sent many, many alerts, and they all have not been a success, but I've learned from them. And one of the lessons I learned, Jeanette just referenced, I essentially, we didn't have a lot of information, and I did not put a place for them to go get more information. And I had in there, if seen, call 911. And it didn't take very long for the 911 dispatch center to reach out to me and basically say, don't do that. Because essentially you just clogged up the lines of people saying, well, am I in danger? Tell me more. And it was one of those early times when I did this when I really was like, okay, I need to do something else because people want to know. And so instead of calling 911 with information, they were calling asking for information. So, yes, absolutely made that mistake. Um,
Don't make it again.
Oh, no, and that's the whole thing is we learn, and so, again, if you're the person that wrote this, we don't want you to feel too bad, we want you to learn from it. I will say, though, there's a part 2 to this, and I'm excited to share it because 'cause you're like, "Well, there's gotta be more to this story," and there is, and I think you're gonna like it. While I get that ready, um, I'm gonna ask Jeanette one more time to just talk about the Warn Room because the Warn Room is a strategic partner of the Alerting Authority. The alerting authority does a lot to provide training, to provide care, encouragement, and really trying to set the standard for what we would expect for alerting authorities to be at. But we couldn't do it without the Warn Room.
Thank you for saying that. The Warren Room has been providing research and evidence base for practice for 3 years now. And if you are interested in learning more about the research that supports all of the recommendations that we provide and all of the strategies that we suggest, then you should check out thewarnroom.com. You can see blog posts that dissect messages like we are doing today on this podcast. You can also get access to all of the research papers that have been published by myself and my research team domestically and internationally. And we make that information freely available to you so that you can get access to those very dense research articles. But keep coming back to the podcast where we're going to be translating that information, making the science applicable directly to you as alerting authorities.
No, and we really like traveling. I mean, traveling, for those that travel a lot, and Jeanette and I have traveled a lot, it's not as glamorous as you think, but we really enjoy meeting people and talking to you. One of the really nice things about this podcast is we can answer a lot of the questions we get as a one to many, and we're able to address these. And so, again, as much as we like being out there, we really like being able to take the time that's needed to address the concerns that are brought to us. All right, so you ready for part 2? I hope so,
Let's
because
go.
this is one of those where you well, let me just pull it up on the screen. I'll read it for everybody who's listening. This alert was sent by the same entity that sent the first one, and it's kind of a follow-up, if you will. So, it's coming up on the screen, and again, it says emergency alert. It says, and I'm actually reading it verbatim, "Ref. The previous message to shelter in place. The suspect is in police custody." So just one more time, you get this later. Ref, the previous message to shelter in place, period. The suspect is in police custody. Wow, well, it sounds like everything worked out, right?
Yeah, but I was never told to shelter in
I
place.
know. Um, and again, there's something with updates. We're a fan of providing updates and keeping the community informed, but there's also a standard of practice that you should reach. And so I think this is why it talks about, or when we talked about over alerting and you talked about some of the different parts of it, when I saw this piece of the message, that's another thing that just hit me. Um, because is this even an effective message by itself? Does it reference the actual message other than the word ref?
One of the things that we talk about in good messaging is this idea of consistency. And this is a really good example of inconsistency because the language in the second message does not match what was said in the previous message. The previous message didn't say the people who had received that initial alert were to shelter in place. In fact, we spent a lot of time talking about whether or not the person with the gun was a danger to the people who were receiving the message, or if they were just being invited to call 911. So now we find out that there was actually an expectation from that initial sender that anyone who received that first message was actually sheltering in place, which they were not told to do. But I'm also wondering, what does it mean when they say the suspect is in police custody? Does this mean that they'd been searching for the person because they did something bad? That sounds like cop talk to me.
Well, and again, as you mentioned, it wasn't even referenced in the beginning, because we were just looking for someone with a gun, and I can't even say we were looking. It just said there is someone with a gun. We didn't know any of the actions that were taking place. Um, and again, there's always more to the story, and this is one of the things that Jeanette talked about in the beginning is when you're looking at the screen, if you're creating this alert, you understand all the pieces, how they're put together, and in your mind, it may make sense. But as the community receives this, not only did they receive the first one, and let's say they may have been a little confused, but now they receive the second one, and they could be shocked now. And I mean, they're probably happy that someone has been put in custody, I guess, but they're probably thinking, was I in danger? Did I miss something? And it's that whole confusion. And you go to the shelter in place, and I go back to that first scenario where I'm like, if I'm a school administrator, and if I get this second message that's referencing the previous message to shelter in place, and let's say we didn't shelter in place, if I get calls from parents from other people saying, "Hey, what happened at the school? You sheltered in place." I'm like, "Well, no, we didn't. I'm not really sure what happened." Well, there was a message that people were sheltered in place, and it's just, again, inconsistency. If you are in law enforcement and you are trying to compel someone to take an action to protect themselves, there is no issue with that. It's just you need to provide them with the right information so they can do that. So that after it's all done and you're saying thank you for taking that protective action, there's that connection. Because I'm telling you, the people who got this second message were probably just as surprised, because it probably upped that level of severity from the incident that they may not have been thinking previously.
I agree. And, there is more jargon in this message than in the first one.
I was
Because they're
literally
also
about to like
using
throw up a soft pitch ball and be like, let's just hit a couple points of jargon.
in this one, the use of the phrase shelter in place is jargon too. And it it for uh, going on the idea of schools, and when they're dealing with a potential active threat or a potential shooter, I don't even think they use the language of shelter in place. I think they go directly to lockdown or lockout. um, that's for another conversation, but shelter in place can mean a lot of different things. For a shooter situation or somebody who has a gun, then shelter in place means specific actions need to be taken about going inside, locking your doors, staying away from windows. None of that information was provided in the previous message. And shelter in place can mean something entirely different for any other hazard. And without clearly explaining what you need people to do to protect themselves, that phrase is pretty meaningless.
Well, and it's one of those that, and again, as we travel around, we see this and shelter in place, and we get in these discussions with local alerting authorities or organizations, as they say, "Well, we use shelter in place," and the question is, what does it mean? Just as she said, and there's this mistaken idea, and it's a big fallacy, and again, as someone who writes messages still, in my mind, I think, well, people understand what I'm saying. They don't. And there are always going to be portions of the population that don't understand what it means to shelter in place. Am I holding still? And so as we talk to different alerting authorities, we're like, what's the actual intent? What do you want them to do? And for some, they're like, we want people to get inside. Then type, go indoors. Oh, but it's a jargon that we have really just taken on as saying, well, people understand this jargon. And we're here to tell you, avoid the jargon. Um, it's not the most effective. And a conversation that I had recently with someone who specializes in translation, and they're talking about the way messages translate. Shelter in place does not translate to other languages very well. See? But what does is direct comments like "go indoors" or something similar to that, that can translate. And for those of you who have communities who speak languages other than English, then you need to really take that into just your thoughts. Go for it, Jeanette.
Right. I totally agree. And I want to make another comment about some research that we have related to this secondary message that was issued. Because we we now know the kind of information people need when they receive that second message. And in this case, it appears like it's an all clear kind of a message because they're saying the suspect is in custody. What people need to know is that if they had been asked to shelter in place, that it's now safe for them to come out. And providing that kind of instruction is just as important as the instruction of telling people to take the action of going inside. Can you imagine if the second message had not come out and people had been told to go inside and to lock their doors and stay away from windows, and then no one was ever told that they can stop doing that? That's the importance of this, what we call a post alert message, indicating that the situation is all clear, telling people that it's safe, the situation has been handled, and that they can now come back out or they can stop taking the action that they were asked to take. And of course, in this case, they weren't actually asked to take this action, but a better practice would be to tell people that not only is the suspect in custody, but the event has been concluded and that people are safe to come out.
100%. And I will tell you from, again, experience, it's frustrating. And the public, our communities, I mean, they support us, but at the same time, they get frustrated, and it's valid because we have asked them or got them involved by sending them an initial message, so they're emotionally connected. They could feel all the different feelings that are associated with whichever the hazard is. And in this one, it's someone with a gun. And I mean that definitely, not to pun, but it triggers a lot of us and in a lot of fear. When it concludes, I'll talk to different people. I'm like, "Well, how'd you know it was over?" "Well, I guess it's over." And then you talk to the law enforcement involved or whoever was sending the messages, and they'll often say something like, "Well, we posted it on social media that it's over," or "We put out a news release that it's over." And that just does not cut it. And that is a absolute my opinion, but it's got to be better. And I feel like every time I make a good point, I get that noise in the background. So it's timed really well.
That's our good friend Michelle Wood who keeps texting me.
She's probably saying like, "Oh my goodness, yes."
She is. She's chiming in with her text messages. uh, um, but we have so much research to support these good practices, and this information about post alert messages is also available on the Warn Room website, and it is something that we can help with as the alerting authority of helping organizations to become better at knowing how to write messages, to make them consistent, to make them complete, and developing those strategies to really do this well. I love that, Eddie, when you talk about what we do with the alerting authority is to help to create competence, confidence through competence. The more confidence that they have, the more competent they feel, and the more competent that they feel, the more confidence they have. And those two things just go hand in hand. And the alerting authority provides the kind of training that's necessary to help people to develop that competency. And we do it in multiple ways. We provide training. We conduct message audits where you get direct feedback about the kinds of messages that you've issued in the past. We can help you to develop those templates for future messages by drawing from the evidence base that we've been developing for decades. Um, and we can provide policy assistance. And in some cases, you just need someone to kind of hold your hand to get through writing your messages. And you might just want to join a warning boot camp where you have that opportunity to work in a small group and get the one-on-one feedback and complete your message library in a short amount of time. But all those things are available through the Alerting Authority, and we would love to help you to do better.
And just to echo what she said is, as this episode comes to a close, we are here for you and we are a part of your community. And there really hasn't been uh, a resource like this that's been offered. Sometimes you'll see social media posts to say this person sent alert and it was horrible, or all these different things. It's pretty condescending. And while we may pick apart different alerts, we're trying to help you understand the reasons why and how to make it better. And it's important because if we're not helping each other out, who is going to be there? Um, and the problem isn't going away. I think it's actually getting worse because the public is expecting more and more from us because technology is improving. And so our standards need to keep increasing. And I really think it's possible. So you're never alone in this. We look forward to having many more conversations, and I appreciate you spending the time with us. Remember, your job absolutely matters. What you do makes a huge difference. And if we can help you just tweak it a little more to make yourself more confident in being able to send out these critical messages, we want to be there for it. Just as the podcast says, every second has a story, and we want to be there as a part of it with you. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.